I never thought a single phone call could make my entire sense of self unravel, but that night it did. I remember the shrill ring cutting through the quiet hum of my apartment, my hand trembling as I picked it up. On the other end, my wife's voice was calm, almost clinical, but every word carried the weight of judgment. "You owe more than you can pay. I can help you, but there's a condition." I froze. I had always known money could dictate freedom, but I hadn't imagined it could dictate identity. She paused, as if savoring the power she held. "You'll wear the dress I pick, every day, until the debt is cleared. No exceptions." My mind spun, disbelief and fear coiling together. A dress? Not just any dress, but hers. My fingers gripped the phone tighter, nails digging into skin I barely recognized as mine. The next morning, she appeared at my door with a box. It was heavier than I expected, wrapped in pastel paper that mocked me with femininity. The moment I opened it, the soft fabric spilled out like a confession I wasn't ready to make. My heart hammered, chest tight, eyes tracing the curves and lace, as if touching them could transport me to a life I didn't know I wanted. "Put it on," she instructed, voice gentle yet commanding, and I felt the first sting of humiliation mix with a strange, unfamiliar curiosity. As I stepped into the bathroom and stared at my reflection, I saw my own shock mirrored back. The dress clung, reshaping, softening, highlighting features I had ignored for years. I felt raw vulnerability, but also an odd thrill. My reflection whispered possibilities I hadn't dared to speak. My hands trembled as they smoothed the fabric, my thoughts a chaotic tangle of resistance and intrigue. For the first time, I questioned whether the debt I owed was only financial or if it had always been tied to something deeper, something I had been afraid to explore. Walking into the living room, I felt her gaze, evaluating, patient, almost proud. My knees shook under the weight of her silent approval. She didn't rush me, didn't speak, but her eyes told me that this was only the beginning. Each movement felt like betrayal and liberation at the same time, each step a negotiation between the man I was and the person who might exist beneath layers I hadn't dared to peel away. By the evening, I had learned that every glance in the mirror, every fabric brush against my skin, could ignite a storm of conflicting emotions: shame, wonder, fear, desire, confusion. Yet underneath it all was an undeniable thread of curiosity I couldn't cut. My debt was not just a number now. It was a passage, a key unlocking a door to a part of me I hadn't yet named, one I wasn't sure I was ready to meet. And still, a question lingered in the air, sharp and unrelenting. Could I survive this, not just in body, but in mind, in heart, in the reflection that stared back at me with eyes that suddenly felt both mine and unknown? The first morning in the dress felt like walking on a tightrope stretched over my own anxieties. My body felt foreign, each step a reminder that the world would notice a version of me I had never allowed myself to inhabit. I caught glimpses of my reflection as I moved through the apartment, shimmering, strange, impossibly delicate. The lace hugged my shoulders, the fabric flowed past my knees, and I could feel my silhouette softening in ways that made my chest tighten, my stomach twist, and my pulse race. I wanted to run, hide, erase it all, but a small, quiet part of me resisted. It was curious, hungry even, in ways I had never admitted. She watched me closely, a mixture of pride and amusement flickering across her face. "Stand up straight," she said, her voice even, almost maternal. "No slouching. You're going to learn to carry yourself differently." I obeyed, feeling the subtle shift in my posture, the way the dress forced me to move differently, think differently. I caught myself hesitating every time I lifted my hands, self-conscious about the way the sleeves brushed against my skin, as if the fabric were asking me to become someone new, someone softer, more open. That afternoon, we went shopping. Not just any shopping, but a deliberate immersion into a world I had always observed from the outside. The way the mirrors multiplied me made my head spin. I saw a stranger in every reflection, someone delicate, vibrant, unsure, and yet undeniably alive. I felt every pair of eyes in the store on me, though most didn't even glance twice. And yet, my mind magnified every imagined judgment, twisting each neutral look into an accusation, a test, a verdict. She guided me through choices I had never considered. The cut of a skirt, the weight of a blouse, the softness of tights. Each decision felt like surrender and assertion at the same time. You need to understand the difference between comfort and confidence, she said. This isn't just about the dress. This is about how the world sees you and how you see yourself. The words sank deep, unsettling me. I wanted to argue, to reject, but the truth was unsettlingly clear. I had no choice. And yet, even as I obeyed, a part of me thrilled at the thought of learning to inhabit this new self. Back at the apartment, I tried to remove the dress, but something held me back. The reflection in the mirror now felt less like a stranger and more like a challenge, a question I needed to answer. Who could I be if I allowed this identity to exist alongside the one I had always known? I touched the fabric reverently, tracing seams and folds, feeling the way it shaped me. The way it whispered that I was not just playing a role, but discovering a hidden layer of myself. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind refusing to quiet. I imagined walking down the street in the dress, the way people might see me, judge me, misunderstand me. But I also imagined walking taller, lighter somehow, with a confidence I had never known. And somewhere between fear and fascination, I realized that my debt, the one I had feared, dreaded, and hidden, had become something more than numbers on a page. It had become a mirror reflecting parts of me I had long denied. Sleep finally came, but not before a quiet thought settled in the back of my mind, persistent and insistent. Maybe this wasn't punishment. Maybe it was the first step toward understanding who I truly was, beneath all the fear and denial, beneath the everyday masks I wore. Maybe the dress wasn't just fabric. Maybe it was freedom in disguise. The next morning, I woke with a strange heaviness in my chest, as if the dress had woven itself into my very bones overnight. When I looked into the mirror, the reflection didn't shock me as much as it did yesterday. It was growing familiar, though not fully friendly yet. My hair fell differently under the weight of the soft fabric. My shoulders narrowed under the blouse's delicate tailoring, and even my hands seemed smaller, more careful, as if they belonged to someone else entirely. I didn't recognize myself, and yet I couldn't look away. Breakfast was silent. She watched me, sipping her coffee with a casual authority that made my stomach twist. "You'll need to practice walking, speaking, moving," she said, her words light but deliberate. "Confidence is more than a posture. It's in your eyes, your voice, every gesture." I nodded, though my mind was racing. Every instinct in me screamed to resist, to retreat, to shed the dress and reclaim what I called normal. And yet, the smallest spark of curiosity whispered, "What if this is who you were meant to meet?" The first real challenge came when we went to run errands. I had expected people to stare, maybe judge, but I hadn't prepared for the internal storm. Each glance felt magnified, each whisper imagined as ridicule. I caught myself adjusting the dress repeatedly, tugging at seams, smoothing wrinkles, desperately trying to control the way my body betrayed the nervous tension coiling inside me. People passed by, neutral, kind, indifferent, and still, I felt naked under their invisible scrutiny. My pulse raced. My lips trembled. I wanted to disappear. She guided me gently through it, holding my hand when my legs shook, whispering encouragement when my breath hitched. "You're more capable than you think," she said. "This isn't just about looking right, it's about feeling right, owning what you are." The words sank into the part of me that I had long neglected, the part that had always craved acceptance, first from others, then from myself. Slowly, step by step, I began to walk a little taller, lift my chin a little higher, breathe a little easier. But with each small victory came the echo of doubt. Who am I if this is me? And who was I if I had never tried this? Back home, I collapsed on the couch, exhausted. The dress felt heavier now, not physically, but emotionally. I traced the fabric absently, feeling the texture, the folds, the way it clung and flowed. A rush of conflicting feelings hit me. Embarrassment, exhilaration, longing, fear. I realized I was crying, though not from sadness entirely. It was relief, recognition, the strange ache of finally confronting a hidden piece of myself. Days blurred into routines. Morning dress, mirror reflection, public outings, private rehearsals of posture and voice, quiet moments of reflection when I thought no one was watching. Each day I discovered nuances, the subtle sway of my hips, the delicate lift of my shoulders, the rhythm of walking that made me feel both exposed and alive. I started noticing small things too, the way certain colors complemented my skin, how soft fabrics soothed my nerves, how a well-chosen accessory made me feel seen. The world hadn't changed, but I was beginning to see it differently. Yet the internal conflict never fully faded. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with thoughts I hadn't allowed myself to entertain before. Am I losing myself? Or am I finally finding the self I've hidden? The question haunted me, persistent as a pulse. Every day brought small victories and humiliations alike. Every reflection, every glance, every hesitant word spoken in this new persona tested the boundaries of who I thought I was. And just when I started to believe I was making progress, an unexpected twist hit. A colleague, someone I had known for years, saw me in the dress at the store. Their eyes widened, not with mockery, but surprise, curiosity, and something I couldn't quite name. My throat tightened. My legs felt like they might give way under the weight of scrutiny. And yet, for the first time, I noticed a tiny spark of pride flickering beneath the panic. I had survived the encounter. I had walked through fear. I had been seen, and I was still standing. That night, as I changed out of the dress, I held it in my hands, the soft fabric whispering against my skin. My reflection in the mirror no longer seemed entirely foreign. I was still me, and yet, undeniably, something more. Something fragile, tender, and startlingly real. My debt, my fear, my hesitation, they hadn't disappeared, but they had become catalysts, forcing me to confront truths I had long ignored. I realized, with a quiet, almost shocking clarity, that transformation was never about the dress alone. It was about discovering the courage to meet myself. The following week became a crucible, a test of endurance I hadn't expected. Every morning, I dressed slowly, deliberately, tracing the contours of the fabric as if memorizing a map to a new self. The dress, once alien, was beginning to feel like a second skin, a layer that both protected and exposed me at the same time. I caught myself in mirrors throughout the day, in store windows, reflective countertops, even the shiny surface of the car dashboard. Each reflection was a negotiation between fear and fascination, a conversation with a version of myself I hadn't dared to acknowledge until now. The world responded in subtle, often disorienting ways. Strangers offered smiles or polite nods. Friends and coworkers were awkward, cautious, or puzzled, as if they were seeing someone they thought they knew, yet didn't. I became hyper-aware of my voice, the tilt of my head, the cadence of my words. Simple gestures, crossing my legs, tucking a stray lock of hair behind my ear, lifting my chin, felt loaded with meaning I wasn't sure I wanted to carry. Every small act of femininity became a performance and a discovery simultaneously. My wife watched me closely, her presence a mixture of quiet support and unmistakable control. She never criticized outright, but her expectations were clear. Confidence isn't about looking perfect. It's about owning what you are, even when you feel exposed. Her words echoed in my mind constantly. I tried to obey, to internalize them, but there were moments when I felt like a fraud, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. And yet, in the shadows of those doubts, there was a thrill I couldn't ignore, a whisper that perhaps I had been holding back this part of myself for too long, that maybe the person I was discovering was not a replacement, but an extension, something real and alive inside me. The social challenges became more acute when I had to leave the apartment alone in the dress. Every street felt like a gauntlet. Cars slowed, eyes lingered, and my heartbeat raced with every glance, real or imagined. I became acutely aware of my posture, the swing of my hips, the tilt of my shoulders. I adjusted constantly, silently pleading with the world to accept me, to see me, to overlook the anxiety surging just beneath the surface. A minor slip, a stumble over a crack in the pavement, a nervous laugh, felt like confirmation of every fear I had carried about stepping outside this identity. And yet, each successful outing, each moment I survived scrutiny, built a fragile kind of pride that I had never known. At home, the psychological tension didn't let up. I would stare at the dress, at the reflection in the mirror, at the small accessories that suddenly felt like extensions of myself. I realized with a shock that I had begun imagining what it would feel like to choose to wear the dress, not out of obligation, not because of debt, but because I wanted to explore what it meant to exist in this form. The thought terrified me even as it excited me. Is this desire? Acceptance? A mask? Or is it me, finally, reaching out to me myself? One evening, a quiet moment alone turned into a revelation. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting a hem, smoothing the folds of the fabric, and something in the reflection shifted. It wasn't the physical appearance that struck me, but the expression in my eyes, a glimmer of recognition, vulnerability, and a strange kind of pride all at once. I whispered to myself, hesitant, almost afraid to speak it aloud. I can do this. I can exist like this, fully, honestly, and still be me. The words felt revolutionary, and for the first time, I didn't want to tear off the dress, didn't want to run from the reflection. I wanted to study it, inhabit it, understand it. But transformation is rarely linear. The next day brought a subtle, almost cruel twist, a message from an old friend, casual but loaded with assumptions. Hey, saw you out yesterday. Didn't recognize you at first. You will look different. Their tone wasn't unkind, but it carried curiosity tinged with judgment. My stomach lurched. My hands shook. I rehearsed responses in my head, phrases that felt right, phrases that felt like lies. When I finally replied, the words were simple, neutral. Yeah, trying something new. But inside, a storm raged, fear, shame, exhilaration, and a strange defiance that surprised even me. That night, I lay in bed, exhausted not from physical effort, but from the emotional toll of simply being. The dress hung neatly on a chair, waiting for me tomorrow, and I realized something astonishing. It had become more than an obligation. It had become a lens through which I could confront every fear, every desire, every part of myself I had long hidden. And though doubts still lingered, and though the world remained unpredictable and sometimes harsh, I felt the tiniest pulse of something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. By the end of the week, I had begun to notice changes that went beyond the surface. It wasn't just the way the dress clung to my form or the subtle sway of my hips. It was in the way I moved, the way I breathed, the way I felt in my own skin. Each time I looked in the mirror, I saw layers peeling back. The man I had always known, cautious and rigid, and beneath him, a fragile, trembling version of myself that had always existed but never been allowed to speak. The realization was dizzying, almost terrifying. Who was I if this part of me was real? And who was I if I denied it any longer? That morning, my wife suggested we attend a small social gathering. I froze at the idea. A room full of people, eyes that would inevitably linger, subtle judgments waiting to be made. What had started as a private transformation was about to be tested publicly. My chest tightened, my stomach knotted, but I obeyed. I put on the dress she had chosen for the occasion, a soft lavender fabric that felt impossibly delicate, yet comforting against my skin. I practiced walking, speaking, breathing, trying to summon confidence I wasn't sure I had. The gathering was a whirlwind. People smiled, nodded, made polite conversation, but I was hyper-aware of every glance. Every gesture became a test. The tilt of my head, the placement of my hands, the cadence of my voice. I stumbled over a simple greeting and felt my cheeks burn, my pulse hammering. Yet, even as panic threatened to overtake me, I caught glimpses of myself in reflective surfaces and noticed something remarkable. I was surviving. I was present. I was being seen, and somehow I was still standing. My wife stayed close, a steady presence, guiding me subtly with a touch to the elbow, a whispered reminder, a small smile. "You're doing fine," she said, and the words, though simple, anchored me in ways nothing else could. There was no mockery, no judgment, only support and expectation. I realized that my transformation wasn't just about the dress or the way I looked. It was about learning to inhabit a world that had always seemed intimidating, unyielding, and impossible. And as fear slowly shifted into cautious confidence, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't dared hope for: joy. Later, in a quiet corner of the room, someone I knew casually approached me, speaking in a tone of tentative curiosity. "I've never seen you like this before," they said. My throat tightened. "Yeah," I managed, voice barely steady. "Trying something different." Their eyes lingered, not with judgment but with interest, and I felt a strange rush of pride, almost defiance. I am allowed to exist like this, I thought, and I am doing it. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, a revelation I hadn't anticipated. The return home was quiet, almost contemplative. I stood in front of the mirror again, this time alone, tracing the folds of the dress with my fingers. The fabric was soft, almost like a promise, a tangible reminder of the boundary I had crossed. I realized I was no longer just following her rules. I was exploring possibilities, testing limits, discovering facets of myself I had ignored, denied, or feared. My reflection stared back at me with a mix of vulnerability and strength, uncertainty and courage, and I felt a lump in my throat. But just as I began to feel a fragile sense of peace, the anxiety returned in a new form. I caught a glimpse of myself walking past a shop window, the reflection blurred but unmistakable. For a moment, I didn't recognize the person staring back. The dress had changed not just how the world saw me, but how I saw myself. I was confronting a version of me that was both foreign and familiar, fragile and resilient, and I realized that the real transformation wasn't in the fabric. It was in the confrontation with my own identity, the surrender to uncertainty, the willingness to be seen. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, exhausted yet strangely awake. I thought about the debt I had once feared, the dress that had once seemed a trap, the public gaze that had once terrified me. All of it had become a catalyst, forcing me to face truths I had long avoided: the fragility of my ego, the complexity of my desires, the unexpected resilience of my spirit. I understood, with a clarity that both scared and thrilled me, that this journey was far from over. But for the first time, I felt a tentative sense of hope, a recognition that even amid fear, doubt, and uncertainty, I could survive, adapt, and perhaps even thrive. The days that followed were a strange mix of liberation and unease. I had begun to notice the subtle ways my mind was changing along with my appearance. Small gestures felt different, delicate movements instinctive, and even my voice carried a softness I hadn't anticipated. I caught myself in a mirror, studying the curve of my jaw, the tilt of my shoulders, the way my eyes looked back at me with a mixture of curiosity and vulnerability. Sometimes I didn't recognize the person staring back, and sometimes I felt a strange surge of pride in surviving, in daring, in existing so openly in a way I had never allowed before. But every moment of pride was shadowed by doubt. Leaving the apartment felt heavier now, not just because of potential judgment from strangers, but because I was testing boundaries I hadn't yet learned to navigate. Each outing was a mental map of potential risks: who might stare, who might question, who might understand. I rehearsed conversations, expressions, movements, everything, often returning home physically exhausted from the constant hyper-awareness. And yet, amid the anxiety, there was a quiet exhilaration, the knowledge that I was learning to inhabit a world that had once seemed closed off, intimidating, impossible. One afternoon, she suggested we attend a small cafe we hadn't visited before. "I want you to see yourself through the eyes of strangers who don't know you," she said. My stomach twisted. Cafes, public spaces, casual observers, they all carried an unpredictable weight. But I nodded, obeyed, and dressed carefully, smoothing every crease, adjusting every fold, walking with a mixture of caution and effortful grace. The cafe was quiet but populated enough to feel like a stage. I ordered a drink, my hands shaking slightly as I held the menu, aware of how my reflection shimmered in the window beside me. People glanced at me occasionally, some with curiosity, some with nothing at all. My heart raced with imagined judgments, my palms damp. Every sip, every gesture, every moment felt magnified, yet somehow I endured. Each small victory, the unflinching glance of a stranger, the casual smile from a barista, the way I navigated my own nerves, felt monumental. Back home, exhaustion and reflection collided. I sat on the couch, the dress soft and tangible beneath my fingers, and realized I was changing in ways I hadn't predicted. My fear was still there, but it no longer dominated. It had become one of many voices in the chorus of my identity. I began to see my reflection not just as someone I had to perform, but as a person I might choose to inhabit, even beyond the obligation of debt. That thought was thrilling and terrifying at once, because it demanded honesty. Honesty with myself, honesty about desire, about curiosity, about fear. That night, a small twist of the unexpected arrived. A neighbor, someone I had seen only briefly before, knocked at the door. I opened it cautiously, dress perfectly in place, hair smoothed carefully. Their expression was one of surprise, yes, but also warmth. I didn't realize. You look really nice, they said, words simple yet carrying unspoken acknowledgement. I felt my face heat, my pulse quicken, and a shiver of emotion ran through me. The recognition wasn't just about appearance, it was about existence, about being seen fully, without judgment, and it terrified me as much as it thrilled me. I spent the rest of the evening reflecting. The dress had become a lens, a mirror, a test, a revelation. My debt, once a looming shadow, had transformed into a catalyst for self-discovery, a gateway I had never sought but could not ignore. I traced the fabric with my hands, feeling its softness, its weight, its insistence, and realized with a shock that I had begun to want to wear it. Not out of obligation, not out of fear, but out of curiosity, out of recognition, out of a desire to explore a version of myself I had long denied. Sleep came slowly that night, each thought looping between fear and fascination. I understood that the journey was far from over, that social challenges, self-doubt, and emotional turbulence were still ahead. But beneath it all, a fragile thread of something new had begun to form: acceptance. Not full acceptance, not easy acceptance, but a quiet acknowledgement that this part of me, delicate, tentative, confusing, was real, and that perhaps it deserved to exist, to be explored, to be seen. The following days became a kind of trial by fire. Every morning, putting on the dress felt less like a chore, and more like stepping into a new skin, a new rhythm of life I was still learning to inhabit. My reflection in the mirror became a place of dialogue rather than judgment. I studied the subtle changes in my posture, the tilt of my head, the way the fabric draped across my body. I felt both powerful and vulnerable, a paradox I hadn't fully understood until now. Each glance in the mirror was an internal negotiation, a push and pull between fear and fascination, between resistance and desire. Then came the first real test of social endurance. My wife suggested attending a small family gathering. My chest tightened at the thought. My extended family had always seen me in a certain light, reserved, conventional, predictable. The idea of stepping into that space in a dress, of being fully visible in this new form, made my stomach churn. Yet, there was no arguing. Her tone left no room for debate. "You can't hide," she said softly. "You need to see how the world reacts, and you need to see how you react to yourself." Driving to the gathering, I rehearsed every gesture, every word, every expression. My hands gripped the steering wheel until they ached. My reflection in the rearview mirror caught my attention repeatedly, and I studied it as if it were a riddle I had to solve. The subtle sway of my hips, the soft curve of my shoulders, the way my fingers brushed against the fabric, all of it felt magnified, loaded with significance. Part of me wanted to run, to hide in the safety of my old self, but another, quieter part whispered insistently, "You can do this. You must." The arrival was like stepping into a pressure cooker. My family's eyes widened, some with surprise, some with curiosity, and some with unmistakable judgment. I felt every glance, every whispered question, every pause like a weight pressing against my chest. My pulse hammered, and for a moment, I was certain I would collapse under the scrutiny. My wife stayed beside me, calm and grounding, her hand lightly brushing mine. "Breathe," she murmured. "You're allowed to exist here." I nodded, shaking, and took a slow, deliberate step forward, then another, until I was moving among them, speaking carefully, laughing cautiously, navigating a minefield of social tension that made every movement feel monumental. And then something remarkable happened. Gradually, as conversations unfolded, as people asked questions that were neutral or even kind, as the initial shock faded, I began to feel a tiny ember of confidence spark inside me. I caught glimpses of my reflection in a window, in the shiny surface of a table, and for the first time, I saw someone who was not entirely frightened, not entirely awkward, but present, aware, alive. The recognition startled me, made my heart ache with a mixture of relief and wonder. I am doing this. I am surviving this. I am existing. By the time we left, exhaustion had settled into my bones. The drive home was quiet, the city lights streaking past like reminders of the world I was beginning to navigate differently. At the apartment, I changed out of the dress slowly, reverently, almost as if I were taking it off only to study it, to examine every seam, every fold, every detail. I realized with a quiet shock that I didn't want to remove it entirely. The dress had become more than fabric. It had become a vessel, a symbol, a tangible manifestation of the self I was discovering. That night, I lay awake longer than usual. Thoughts tumbled through my mind in a chaotic flood: pride and fear, shame and curiosity, resistance and acceptance. I realized that the external challenges, the stares, the comments, the subtle judgments, were easier to face than the internal ones. The hardest part was accepting that I was changing, that I was exploring a self I had long denied, and that this exploration might not have a simple endpoint. It demanded honesty I wasn't sure I could give, vulnerability I wasn't sure I could withstand, and courage I wasn't sure I possessed. And yet, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the anxiety, a quiet revelation emerged. I was learning to survive in this new skin, to inhabit it without shame, to explore it without fear. The dress had become a mirror not just of appearance, but of identity, a lens through which I could see the unspoken, unacknowledged parts of myself. I understood, with a clarity that was both thrilling and terrifying, that this journey was far from over, but I also realized that I no longer wanted it to be. I wanted to continue, to see, to feel, to exist fully in a space I had never dared enter before. Sleep finally came, and with it, the subtle, exhilarating sense of possibility. That transformation was not just about debt, not just about obedience, not just about appearance, but about discovery, courage, and the quiet, persistent act of learning to accept oneself. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, soft and forgiving, but I barely noticed it. I had slept fitfully, my mind tangled in the events of the past weeks, the confrontation of my reflection, the confrontation of the world, and most of all, the confrontation of myself. The dress lay on the chair, familiar and alien at the same time, almost like a living thing, waiting for me to meet it again. My hand hovered above it, hesitant, reverent, and when I finally touched the fabric, I felt a tremor of something I couldn't name: fear, curiosity, longing, all woven together. Putting it on, as I did every morning now, no longer felt like punishment. It felt like a ritual of acknowledgement, of facing the truth I had been running from. The fabric hugged my body, and I studied the reflection in the mirror with an intensity that bordered on obsession. I traced my own features with a finger, not out of vanity, but as if learning the geography of a new self. I could see the subtle changes in my posture, the way my shoulders now carried a slight sway, the way my chest rose differently when I breathed. I looked and felt like a stranger, but a stranger I was beginning to know, beginning to trust, beginning to inhabit. That day, my wife suggested a walk in the park, a public, open space with no familiar faces, no safety net. I felt my stomach twist at the thought. Fear and excitement tangled in my chest like wires short-circuiting. But I dressed carefully, smoothing every fold, brushing hair into place, adjusting my shoes, and when I finally stepped outside, the world hit me with an intensity one hadn't fully anticipated. Wind teased the hem of the dress, sunlight caught the fabric, and every movement I made felt both exposed and deliberate. I walked with a mixture of caution and experiment, testing each step, each gesture, each tilt of my head. People passed by, some glancing, some avoiding my eyes, some giving polite smiles. I felt every imagined judgment, every subtle assumption, and yet a strange confidence began to bloom. Each step became a small act of defiance, a quiet claim of existence. I am here. I am real. I am visible. My pulse raced, my breath quickened, but I didn't flee. I didn't hide. I continued walking, feeling the rhythm of the dress, the rhythm of my own body, the rhythm of a self I was beginning to understand. And then, unexpectedly, I laughed. A small, startled sound, but genuine. I realized I had been holding my tension in every muscle, in every thought, and in that moment, letting it go felt revolutionary. The laughter became a bridge, a recognition that fear could coexist with joy, that uncertainty could coexist with pride, that vulnerability could coexist with strength. I felt lighter, freer, more present than I had in years. Returning home, I didn't immediately remove the dress. Instead, I studied it, held it against my body, and realized that it was more than a garment. It was a symbol, a key, a mirror. It had carried me through anxiety, social scrutiny, internal conflict, and self-doubt. It had forced me to confront the parts of myself I had denied, ignored, or feared. And as I stood there, fingers tracing the delicate seams, I realized something profound. The debt I had once feared was not the point. The point had always been me, discovering, exploring, and ultimately accepting the self that had always been present, waiting for acknowledgement. That evening, my wife came into the room, her eyes soft but unyielding. "How do you feel?" she asked. Her question was simple, but it carried weight. I paused, searching for words that could capture the tumult of the last weeks, the fear, the embarrassment, the exhilaration, the fragile pride. And then I spoke, slowly, honestly. I feel like me, but also more than me. I didn't know I could feel this fully, this openly. It's scary, and it's amazing, and I think I want to keep going. She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't judge, doesn't demand, but simply acknowledges truth. "Then you will," she said. "This isn't the end. It's a beginning." And in her words, I felt the weight of permission, of acceptance, of liberation. Later, alone, I sat in front of the mirror once more. I studied my reflection with patience and awe, tracing the contours of my face, the shape of my body, the way my expression had shifted subtly over these weeks. I realized that transformation isn't just about appearance. It's about courage, honesty, vulnerability, and the relentless pursuit of self-acceptance. The dress was not the master. It was the catalyst, the mirror, the bridge. It had forced me to meet myself, fully, without denial, without fear, and to discover that beneath every layer of hesitation, beneath every mask I had worn, there was a self that deserved to exist, fully and unapologetically. For the first time, I allowed myself to smile in the mirror, not forced, not cautious, but truly, deeply. And in that smile, I recognized the truth I had been avoiding. I was no longer just surviving this transformation. I was embracing it. I was learning from it. I was becoming the person I had always been, and perhaps always wanted to be, in a way that was delicate, complex, beautiful, and real. And as I finally set the dress aside for the night, I whispered to my reflection, to the quiet voice within me that had grown louder and stronger over these weeks. I see you. I accept you. And I am ready for whatever comes next. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole.